So there we go. And now we're recording. All right, Kelly, thank you for being season 2, episode 1 of Temporary Book Club. We're doing America, the Farewell Tour by Chris Hedges. And with me today, we have Kelly Egan. Kelly, will you introduce yourself for me?
Sure. So I'm Kelly Egan. I teach first grade at Cincinnati Public School. I am married with 4 kids, 27 down to 9. And Mike and I go way back. We've worked in the restaurant industry together. We're teachers. I have a passion for books. This book was definitely a good challenge for me. I'll say that. Passionate about a lot of things, especially equal rights, my family, gardening, a lot about climate change. So my plate's pretty full.
Heck yeah. And that's why I picked you for this book. When this book came out, I don't know, maybe it's because we live in Cincinnati or what it is, but I have very few friends that think like us. Most of them are the ones that read, and I hate to say that. God, it sounds so bad. But, when you said you were willing to do this, sometimes I take the personality of the person and I'm like, hey, I recommend a book, or they'll come back with a book. But this one, for some reason, and I can't what it was, maybe it was something you posted online. I was like, all right, this is Kelly. This is the one, like you said, you're passionate about a lot of things. And this thing, oh my gosh, I'm sure, I think Kelly said she feels the same way, is, I don't know if I feel dumber or if it's just he hit so many things all at once that I'm like, even going into this conversation, I'm like, I don't even know how we're going to touch this book. And it's
so relevant that he could have, published it yesterday. Like, as I'm reading this, I kept thinking, like, is this 4 years old? Is this a week old? It was so relevant, and I could relate to so many different areas. And it was a struggle because they're not necessarily really good thoughts that were coming out of them. It definitely wasn't the happy ending and, a feel good at the end. I felt like
it's not a happy
internally
message.
like a struggle.
So, and that comes in the title, right? So we got America, the Farewell Tour, right? And I'm going to read the cover like I usually do. Is America in a state of irrevocable decline? In this provocative and disturbing examination of our country, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Chris Hedges argues that the United States shows unmistakable signs of a dying culture. Across the country, Americans are suffering from chronic unemployment, declining wages, and a morbid despair that expresses itself through compulsive gambling, sadistic pornography, and a deadly opioid epidemic. Xenophobia has become rampant, and a desperate and bitter underclass searches for scapegoats. America's social fabric is unraveling, while at the same time we face global upheaval caused in part by catastrophic climate change. All these ills presage a frightening reconfiguration of the nation and the planet. Donald Trump rode this disenchantment to power. In America, the Farewell Tour, Hedges argues that neither political party now captured by the corporate power, will address our systematic problems. Until our corporate coup d'etat is reversed, our problems will grow and ravage the country. A poignant cry reported from the communities across the country, from Atlantic City to San Francisco. America, the Farewell Tour, seeks to jolt us out of our complacency while there is still time to take action. So I think you pretty much nailed it when you said, like, at the end of this book, how did you feel?
In a way, I was really sad. I was sad that we know these things and we're not doing enough to fix them. And I really felt you could actually have a podcast on each individual chapter, because each chapter is so heavy and you're just being able to pull so much out of them. And it's and we know these things are happening, and we're not doing it. We're not fixing the problem. And so a lot of these problems have potential solutions, or at least a start to a solution, and we're not doing that. And it's sad. And it kind of made me like become more fearful. I mean, I feel like I'm very passionate. I go out and I do what I can, and I try to, I don't try to push my opinion on other people, but I try to educate people that I think may not know. And then, and I expect them to do the same, for me. And then we all make our own choices. But for me to read this book, and there was a lot of things I didn't know. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Have I just been stuck with my head in the sand? I mean, it's almost embarrassing. I mean, I know I teach first grade, but there were a lot of things in the book that I was like, how do I not know this? How do I not know that, so there were some things about the Christian, the right-wing Christians, and as he was talking about it, and about how 81% are voting for Trump, and then all of the different qualifications and all the different things that they support, that Trump supports. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that that's such a big draw. Well, I mean, I realized that it was a big draw, but I didn't realize like how ingrained he was with them, and why, that is becoming such a big struggle for us too.
Right. No, but I don't think you can blame yourself. I think the problem is, number one, this despair that he says we have and that we're feeling. He gives it a name. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but you're fighting the fight, and I feel like I'm trying to fight the fight, but the fight is huge, and this book proves it. And as you're trying to fight this fight and educate, and you knew these things were there, but it's almost like we don't have the time or the energy, and you're focused on this. Why look and see, hey, what's the other thing that's shitty around here, right?
Right.
Like, so I hate for you to say, oh, I feel ignorant, or I feel silly not knowing this. Man, we live in a time that is unprecedented for, well, I hate to say unprecedented because it has happened, but in the United States, it's unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't happened in a long time here. And especially with the myths that we've been fed, it's not supposed to happen here. And so as these things that are coming in, I hate to say coming in, a lot of them are coming in. A lot of them are old things that I think Chris mentions really well that we haven't faced. So for the first time in history, we're facing things that we've turned away from for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
Injustices that we've committed to the Native Americans lived here, to race problems, and the inherent racial white superiority that goes through all of our systems. Some people are starting to face those for the first time. And then we have these new problems. So for somebody to look at them now in a book like this, like you said, you get done with it. And I think I wrote you, I'm like, man, that was heavy.
Right.
I knew a lot about it, but he puts it all out there in one thing. And then he doesn't he does try to say, this is how we fix it. But it seems pretty far out there. It seems like he calls it, he doesn't, I think it comes in the name again. He says there's a way to fix it, but I don't think he's very optimistic. And after you read this book, I can't be very optimistic either.
Well, and then I read the article that he had just posted that you sent yesterday, and I was like, oh man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe I was naive, in the sense that I thought, okay, this is a lot of this has to do with the person that we have in office right now. And so in case you can't see, here's my shirt.
I love it. Perfect.
And maybe people are like me, maybe not, that kind of thought like, oh, if we get him out of office, things are going to be better. But there's a lot of things that even if he's not in office are still crumbling. And it's going to take a lot more than a Republican or Democrat that actually has their head on straight with, brains, that to really make a difference in starting to fix some of our issues that we have.
I think you're exactly right. Like, so as we see Trump come into office, you, like me, and being on social media, I think the first things he started doing, one of the first things was a Muslim ban, right? If you would have told me before he was elected, he's going to make a Muslim ban, the guy's over with. society's going to revolt and be like, this guy is crazy. And we did not see that, right? And we don't see that every day since. And so made me a little while ago stand back and say, Trump is definitely a problem, but there have been Trumps always have existed in our society, but they never were president and they never could have become president, right? You can't become president unless you have people that believe in that and back him. And that's what we're seeing now. The issue, Trump is, and I think that's what the book is all about, is America is sick. We are ill. A lot of cultures and societies get sick and ill, and then they never come back. And we are in that state. We are sick and ill. And Trump, as despicable as he is, and yes, I'd like to get him out, and hopefully we vote somebody new in. It's not going to change, like you said. It's not right. Because there's a problem here. It exists, and he is a symptom of it, just like the book goes through all the other symptoms, which are gambling, heroin addicts, suicide, sadism in pornography, hate crimes. All these things at the end of a culture are going to come about, and Trump is one of those things. So, and I think, yeah, it took 3, maybe 4 years for a lot of us left-leaning people to say, oh, wow, okay, I can see, not to give them a way out. They're handling it different, but we are being separated on purpose. And the book talks about that too. Do you remember that?
Well, I know.
Go ahead.
Well, on those points, I just want to say that in my mind, I was thinking that the people that were voting for Trump were more of the rural white people, and then in the book, when he pointed out how it's a lot of the right-wing Christian evangelists that, and they have the money, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power behind them, and they have a lot of networks, TV networks and commercials and right. ways to get all of those things out. And they're very much like Trump in the fact, and behind the scenes, they're doing some of those same things, with ultimate or extramarital affairs and crooked deals and things like that. So he fits right in there with them. They like welcomed him in, and he's not really even any religion, I don't think.
No. Well, yeah, you nailed that. That chapter blew my mind too. When he was like saying, we say, wow, how can these right-wing Christians, the Christian right, support this guy who is so, it seems like anti-Christian. And then he said, Chris Hedges said, but look at these church leaders that they're looking to, they have 10 mansions, and they right. all get caught dating, having affairs, or they get right. caught, having same-sex relationships where right. that they preach is
lavish lifestyles, like to talk about these lavish lifestyles. And it said in the book, just even, just like Trump has like a whole room that's, all in gold, like Versailles, and, and I was like, oh, yeah. So it's not just the rural people that, I think the farmers that I thought were just, I don't want to say didn't know better, but just, that he was kind of relating to. It's this whole other group that has a ton of money behind them that is kind of scary, because I don't feel like they're going to, not only have they pushed a lot of their agendas through, I don't feel like they're going away. So even if Trump goes away and Pence is scarier than Trump in that set, then, they're still good. There's going to be someone coming right up behind them.
We need, and this is a whole other subject, and it's been talked about, is just if politics and political pool is going to be talked about in church, then you need to tax those churches. I mean, these guys are making such a crazy amount of money and getting away with it tax-free. I mean, it's right. It's ridiculous. But there's another group that Hitchens talks about too that started to voted for Trump, and it surprised me was these union guys that in the leading up to the election, they were Sanders supporters, and then, which blew my mind. And then I'm thinking, how do you go from Sanders to Trump? And Hitchens mentions that they're never going to vote for Clinton. And I was not a Hillary fan at all. And I can understand why, you know, what Clinton did with NAFTA and took deindustrialized the United States, took all these jobs away. All these guys are not going to forget that. And they're not going to say, we're going to vote for you, you know, or your family. There was this deep-seated hatred there. And they said they all went Trump too. So that was very surprising. And you're getting people all across the board. And I just want to say one more thing. Hedges mentions in his book, and I might even read a part. At one part, and I love Hedges, let me just say that. I think he's a very smart man. But at one part, he talks about these people being idiots. And at the end of our culture decline, these idiots take over. Yeah. But then at another point of the book, and I think you have to probably look at it both ways, because I've looked at it both ways. But then another part, he says, they're not idiots, they're exploited. And we have to look at them as just being exploited. But I thought it was funny. And because when I'm reading that one part of the book, I'm like, yeah, we're run by the, you know, like the movie Idiocracy. And then later I'm like, but he's like, but you got to take what they're saying. They don't know better. They're being exploited.
Right. Well, and he kept saying idiot over and over again. He would say
Right.
for every single group of people, he would say it. And so that kind of caught my ear. When I first read the book, I did it on audio.
Oh, gotcha.
And I thought, oh, this will be great. I can listen on audio, take the dog out for a walk. Well, there was no place to take notes or anything. Or anything. And I mean, I was like having conversations with myself, like, how does this happen? I can't stop, you know, I'm listening on audio. So I ended up having to get the book when it was, when that came in. And I know.
That's all I do. Notes
I know.
everywhere.
I wish I wanted to be like Mike Meldon, but what I started to do is I just do little ones and then I take notes. I'm still like the old fashioned note taker.
That's awesome.
And so there was something that when you had mentioned Bernie Sanders that I had read about with Bernie Sanders, that kind of surprised me. I don't know if it surprised me, but it was somewhere on here. I'll go back and look at, it said about challenging the war industry. And that was about with Bernie Sanders. And it had said that how Bernie Sanders knows that that's political suicide, but that goes back to chapter 1, like NDK, when they start talking, when that was a whole nother thing that I was unaware of, which was
which was what? Go into that. What do you mean?
So in the chapter of Decay, if you want to, however you want to start that, because that was probably 4 books in itself, just that chapter.
Oh gosh, yeah. It was
and for me, like when they started to talk about Scranton, Pennsylvania, I'd sent you a note saying that like how I really could relate to that.
Because you're from Flint.
I'm from Flint.
Right.
So when they were talking about how, you know, a big business, I think the lace company had gone out of business, and how, you know, that leads to crime and corruption and despair and, you know, suicide. It just leads to everything, drugs. I mean, it's just, and your city starts to kind of crumble around you. And one of the things that he had said in there was that, which I found to be so true, is that that when that happens, you know, those companies, and they were like that in Flint, Michigan too, is that, you know, those were good jobs to go into out of high school. You could be a good worker. You supported your family. You had insurance. It was a great place to work. And then in the very beginning of his book, he said the companies gave more than a wage to thousands of men and women who worked for them. It gave them the dignity, the purpose, pride, a sense of place, hope, and self-esteem. You know,
American dream.
A job can be so much more. And when they take that away,
it was the American dream. It is the American dream.
And it's not just, and then once that is gone, and then it led into how, when they were trying to rebuild that, when the federal government was giving that city money, well, that city, Scranton, was already behind. So then they had to sell off their water, their water
privatization,
system, and they sold it off to someone who's going to charge the people more. And then they had to sell off. I think that company had already owned the sewer system. So then then a big business kind of has a monopoly on that. And the same thing like with parking garages or whatever. And then the poor people aren't getting help. The big businesses are getting pulled out, and then they're they're charging double to the people. And so the people are still, poor or
None of
struggling,
that
and
money's going back.
that money's not going to them. It's not trickling down to them at all.
And it used to be a state or city owned entity where all that money that was made would go back into society, and then, to help out the place they're
Right.
living. And now these places are being, they're decrepit, they're falling apart. And, that's everything being privatized. And that's what we're seeing with schools. That is the end goal. We've seen it working on for 15 years now. The goal is to make schools fall apart, to get teachers so that they don't need a master's education. They just need to come right out of college. It can be a teacher. We saw that with American First out there. They're putting all these things in. They want schools one day to be 100% privately owned, and like you said, it makes total sense when we see all these other entities being sold off. Why not just sell this off too? It's a pain in the butt for the public, for
Right.
communities and governments to run. But we know how painful that's going to be and how detrimental it's going to be to our students and to people that really care about teaching. It's a horrible spot, but this privatization as part of the new America it's horrible. It should be stopped. It needs to be more aware. People need to be more aware of it. Yeah.
I definitely agree. And I worked in both the charter school and in public school, because when I first got out of college, I had a bachelor's degree in women and minority studies. So I was going back to school to get my master's in education. And I thought, well, I'll just go in and sub. And there happened to be a school down the street on the west side of town. And I went in there to see if I could just sub a couple days while I was doing my master's. And they immediately hired me and said, oh, we're gonna hire you as a instructional assistant for this to be a one-on-one for the rest of the school year. This was in December. And I said, okay. He said, we'll guarantee you a job next year. And I thought, great.
Yeah.
I don't have my degree.
Right.
I can finish my master's and teach. That sounds like a great idea. So I did that. They put 34 kids in my class in kindergarten.
Jeez.
I was in a converted locker room. The principal was having extramarital relations with the reading specialist.
He's probably making $300,000.
There were never, there was nothing ever available, and it was always, oh yeah, we're gonna open up another class, and we get enough students. They weren't gonna open up another class, and so I probably got paid 20%, 30% less than I would have for a public school. And so I did that for 3 years.
And the guy that owned it, or the person running it, got 50% more than he would at a public school. That's the thing too.
And
they're making $300,000.
Apartments over on the west side, and then he would put some of the students in there and like be a slumlord over there too.
Exactly, making more money off the
Things
government.
that just were not done properly.
It's crazy.
And so then after 3 years, I went into, I got my degree and went into the public schools and got an immediate, 20% raise to put it where it should have been. I'm from Michigan, and we're overrun by charter schools now up in Michigan, especially with our Secretary of Education up there, Betsy. So both my parents were teachers. My mom taught at Flint Public Schools, and they went from, and I could get these numbers wrong, but I think there was 5 high schools when I graduated, which was a while ago. 5 high schools, and as many as in Cincinnati. I think over 30-some thousand students in the district. There's now 12,000 students in the district and 1 high school.
Wow, sad.
So they are just being taken over.
And how do you backtrack? That's the thing. How we go back? I don't know. And that's why this book gives you despair.
You're right.
Because it's so ingrained, and you're like, oh man, how can we do it? And oh, God, you hate to say it, but the reality is it might be over. He gives us a date, and I don't want to talk about that yet, but he does. He gives us a date. He says 2030, we're all done. But I want to go back to real quick a word, and I gave you this word, anime. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Anami. Emil Durkheim. I teach it in my sociology class in high school. Emil Durkheim was a sociologist, and he studies. Actually, he was really studying suicides. He wasn't in a laboratory. He would go out and talk to people. And he studied suicides in this lack of hopelessness and despair. And that's what most people are going through right now, is because we're so ingrained. Like we say with this school thing, how do I fight this? How do I get it back to where it was when it's already so far along? And these corporations, these big money makers are doing it. I don't know how I'm going to get there. Well, this is what Hedges says we have right now. We're in this anami, I guess that's how you say it, where we don't believe in any institutions. They're not working
Right.
for us. The established order of our government is so corrupt, and we just say, how can we fix it? And so this depression leads to tons more suicides. It is what we just talked about before, where we don't believe the American myth, which was the American dream. You see it in these, mainly it's middle-life white males that are killing themselves because they have this idea of the American dream, and it's not real anymore. It doesn't
Right.
come about. You know, why is it white middle American males? Why are they killing themselves and not black males? And he says, because they knew the myth was fake anyways. They knew that,
Right.
they didn't delude
Which he talks
themselves
about
this
that
whole
in the
time.
book too, on how that's
Yeah, he didn't have this white
it is.
delusion.
It's very interesting because I'm sure that medicine for depression and anxiety is probably at an all-time high. You know, because people feel that despair and, loss of self-esteem, and I don't feel like that we set the bar so high that it's unachievable. I just
No.
think there's so many different things that are just coming down on.
Well, we want to be like our parents. We want it to
Right.
be like when we were growing up.
Right.
Right. I mean, my dad worked a good job. He's an insurance agent that did decent, but my mom worked a little bit here and there, but he was the breadwinner, and he did good for a family of 4 on his salary. Right. That's impossible unless he made triple of, it's impossible
Right.
today. 2 breadwinners. We have, we're both making money. I'm a school teacher. I can't imagine trying to raise my family on just my salary, which was, you could do in the 80s.
Right.
No way.
Right.
Way. We're in trouble now. We could,
right.
No way we could make it.
We all still work second jobs, so.
Exactly right. Kelly and I bartend every now and again together.
Well, and I think, going into teaching, you kind of knew that you weren't going to make fortunes.
We're not in it for the money.
Healthcare. You were going to have good vacation time to be with your children, the perks, and you were going to do a job that you loved.
Right.
And that you were passionate about. You're going to those were the important things.
Job stability too.
And stability.
Seems stable.
Which is those things to me, I would rather do than a lot of other jobs. But now, with going to the different, with having charter schools, or now, funds are getting cut. Like with the whole COVID, how the education funds are getting cut. I mean, how does that happen?
Right.
They want us to open up, but they want to cut our funding.
Should be going the other way.
It's keeping me up at night because we don't have a game plan, and it's not our district. We don't know what to do next. Like, I don't know where to begin, and I'm on the academic team that's helping the reopening, and we don't have the direction or know where to begin because we are the second largest district in the state. So there's a lot of schools to have to deal with, but
it's scary. I'm scared. Yeah. And I hate that the Governor DeWine's done so much for us up. And then once they started marching on him and Amy Acton quit, it's almost like he threw up his hands like, I'm not going to handle this one. Schools, you got this. And he turned his back. And I think he's done so well. It's a shame that he now puts it on the back of schools, because everyone knows that no school is going to do this right. No matter what they do,
right,
they're going to take heated backlash. And that's a shame. Right. I mean, that's a
big
shame.
0.03 children is still too many children. If that's my child,
right?
That's not what I read some analogy said, oh, well, here we're going to put all these dollar bills in here, but 3 of them are going to be deadly. Are you going to stick your hand in there and grab them?
Who would have thought we could have that conversation?
No, I know.
That's never existed. And it's for that to even become part of the other conversation that I think is crazy is with to defund the police, which I don't like that word. I like the name, maybe reform the police. But the thing that drives me crazy is these people act like when you say defund the police or lower their budgets, it's oh my God, it's horrible. It's the worst thing you could say, to defund the police. And it's like, we do it to schools every day. We do it to
Right.
schools. You vote on it. The people that are still like so up in arms about defunding the police are probably the same people that voted against their local levy.
Right.
And it's like, I get it. I don't like that saying. It maybe reform the police. We got to put some things here. And yeah, maybe let's bring down their budgets a little bit, because like he writes in this book, how militarized they are. But don't act like it's the craziest idea on earth.
Right.
You defund schools all the
Well,
time.
I think defunding, some people automatically think disbanding.
Exactly. You're
And,
exactly right.
I mean, even I, wanted to look that up to see exactly how that played out. I had to, believe me, I had to get the dictionary out and look up a lot of words with this book, Mike. You're a hard college educator here.
Hey, let me say this. You bring up a great point. I look up words every book I read.
Yeah.
And that, don't you think? I mean, as far as students, don't be afraid to do that, right?
Yes. I still bring out it's funny because even in first grade, we'll read a story and I'll get vocabulary words and I show them how to use a dictionary. And they'll be like, why do we need? And I said, because you know what? You shouldn't be able to pull this up on your mom's phone. I want you to look, I want you to see if it's a noun. And so in first grade, it might be, it's simple. I mean, it's not simple words. It's, words like dwelling or something,
Right.
And it's usually for some of the fourth and fifth grade books that we would read, that they can read, but they don't comprehend some of the words. But it's very interesting because they laugh at me. There's people, parents or teachers will come in because I got this stack of dictionaries.
No,
in my
it's a
classroom.
great thing. That's awesome.
I said, I'm not making them take them home. I'm not.
But they need
the dictionaries. But there were a lot of words in there, and there's a lot of words I think that people don't know, and they're afraid to ask. I'm a perfect example of that. I don't want to look stupid. So when people are having conversations, I'll just smile and say, okay, and then I'll maybe look it up later, or I'll just form my own opinion and not really know the meaning of the word.
Well, your statement there is when I teach, when I teach history at school, I'm almost teaching reading because it's so important to me. And I think that's why so many people are put off by reading, is they honestly think that when I was reading a book like this, that I pretty much read it and then turn the page and read it and turn the page. Honestly, how many times I have to look up a word, how many times I have to reread a paragraph, maybe 2 times. That doesn't mean I'm a bad reader. I don't care who you are. You're learning something in almost every book you read. It's not going to just pop in your head like, oh, that makes sense. No. And so I think you brought up a good point, is people that want to get back into reading or try reading, know that you're not a bad reader. Those are normal things you do. That is reading. Reading is taking your time, maybe rereading, going back if you took a day off and rereading some of what you read before. Those are skills that make you a good reader.
Well, and you're learning from these books. These are, if you're finding words that you're not running across every day in the newspaper and magazines, it's because they're, bigger words, or they're
not writing at an 8th grade level, which most newspapers are, right?
It's not like everything's terrific, it's stupendous, like fourth grade, and people are really enjoying those conversations that we're getting from the speeches that are coming out of the White House. Everything's stupendous and the greatest of all.
Big.
But that's okay. Those are bigger words because they probably are packing a lot more meaning, and there's a lot more behind it. So 80% of the words in the English language are going to be, stuff that you see all the time. But it's the big words, whether it's, reading a textbook or reading, I don't even know what this book is
a poem. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
anything.
It's just, but you know what? It's good to be able to go back and look so that what you're reading in your mind and what you're thinking about it is making sense.
Yep.
So
no, I agree.
I think so.
100%. So I want to just read one part, because I think it all comes down to the main thing about this book, and man, read it. It's so interesting. There's so many topics we can't talk about in this amount of time. It would take weeks and months. But one thing is the main point is we're sick. We're the culture that's declining. There's all these examples of it. We all have this despair, almost this feeling. And one of the things I wanted to say is that the corporatocracy, the people that are running the show, they don't want you to blame them because they know that if we resist, they'll crumble, maybe. But they want us to blame ourselves. So I thought this was really interesting thing I wanted to read. This mass conformity is characteristic of a totalitarian and an authoritarian states. It is the Disney-fication of America, the land of eternally happy thoughts and positive attitudes. And when magical thinking does not work, we are told and often accept that we are the problem. We must adjust. We must have more faith. We must be positive. We must envision what we want. We must try harder. The system is never to blame. We failed it, and it did not fail us. And I think that's just something people need to hear, with all the suicides going on, with people that are, I hate to say it, I have students that are on Facebook and they're 24, 25 years old, and man, they're living in the tough economy and a tough time and COVID, and they're blaming themselves. And it's like, no. You're growing up in an unprecedented era. I don't care if you're 24 or you're 64.
Right.
This is not your fault,
Right.
In 99.9% of the cases.
Right. And the only thing that you can do is to educate yourself, whether it's through reading or, talking to people that are educated. And, I definitely don't expect everyone to have the same point of view as me, but I want to hear facts and on why you would believe something like that. And I have, family members that I have to say, well, I know you believe differently than me, and that's okay. I'm not going to, I'm not, defriend. I'm not like that. But why do you think that? What makes you, because you really get some insight into why people believe the way they do. And a lot of people are one issue voters, if they don't believe in this, then I'm not going to do it. And that's a struggle.
Abortion, right? One issue voters. And Hitchens makes a point too. He says, if you look at the radical left and you look at the radical right, he says it's silly. We are just one little sliver difference, even though if you talk to the radical left, you talk to the radical right, they're going to say, no, that's crazy. But if you really look at the system and the sickness of the system, and like we said, it's a corporatocracy that is really running this capitalist system to make billions of money, keep people working for very little, but just enough to buy, keep them really far down. And people say, oh, that's the truth. I mean, every economist will tell you that is what we live in today. That's not a conspiracy.
Right. I wrote something down about that.
And if we know that's the system, right, then all of us down here, middle class, lower class, poverty, we should all be working together. And that's what Kitchen says, until we get over our issues. And he even says, he goes so far, and this is before the Black Lives recent movement, he even gets in so far as to say, listen, we have a racial problem here we got to face, we got to do it. But he even says that's one of the things that separates us. We can't fix that yet. Let's fix this problem of economic justice. Everybody, everybody have a meaningful job that gives us meaning, that allows us to pay for essential things, not be worried day to day. Once we get to that point, and that means fighting the system, resisting, then we can handle all these other issues that separate us by a thread. But what's happening on Facebook is the fight is over all these small things, and we're ignoring the major issue that's going to allow us to crumble. It's crazy.
Right. I found it to be like when he was quoting like Karl Marx and Plato, and where he said, a failed democracy creates the conditions for tyranny based on popular support. It happened in Germany and Italy, and it's exactly what's happening with the election of Trump. and to overthrow. So and then he didn't really, he wasn't giving us a solution, but he said to overthrow the corporate state must begin locally.
Yep.
And, advocating for issues as raising the minimum wage, fighting for clean water, universal health care, public education, free university education, directly speaks to the improvements of lives of the working class and all of those things. And it just seemed like, I just felt like I was reading yesterday's newspaper,
Right.
and we are seeing like some local movements and stuff, but it's a lot of times it's taking like something big happening, and then the movement comes on, and then it kind of dissipates out, and then like same thing like with the Women's March and the environment, which the whole thing on climate change, it made me lose sleep.
Yeah.
Did you read, like, I mean, obviously you read it, but do you remember like where he was talking about in 20 years how everything's gonna,
Oh, it's scary. It's scary. It's
scary
scary
that the governors in those states, specifically
Florida.
down in Florida,
yeah, you're not allowed to even say climate change. You're not even allowed to mention it, right?
I mean, I just don't understand how anyone can be a climate change denier.
Because of money, right? Because of money. And then, I try to tell my kids, and I teach modern world issues, and we teach climate change. And obviously, one of the things I tell them, the biggest lobbyist that goes around with all the money is the same exact guy that was paid by tobacco companies when I was growing up to say that tobacco and cigarettes don't cause cancer. It's the same dude. And I said, do you understand and I tell my kids, I said, when I was sitting in your seats, it was kind of like if I asked you guys how many people would say climate change is real, it's 50-50, right? Well, if I asked you how many of you think cigarettes cause cancer, 100% of their hands go up. I said, well, when I was your age, it would have been 50-50, because this guy and all the money behind him are able to just get into people's minds and able to say, no, well, not everybody believes. And that's what we're going through right now. Oh, supported by them. Yeah. But there's one main lobbyist.
I have to check out all my toilet paper before I can buy toilet paper, since they run Georgia Pacific. I'm like, oh, who makes this one?
For you. Good for you. Yeah. The other thing that you talked about is these movements dissipating too. And I think it's a big point is, and you see it on Facebook, is we have these saboteurs that are put in that are making it more violent or more destructive than these things need to be. And Hitchens talks about the point is, and he's not big on Antifa. He doesn't like them. He's obviously anti-fascist, but he believes that whenever we are creating more violence, then you lose the support of the public, social media. And they look at you now as, hey, that gives the police every right to fight back. And that's where we're at with the spot now, is that, and I think Black Lives Matter leaders have done a really great job from everything I've seen to saying, stop this shit, right? Stop this. But you have saboteurs in there, or you have people with rage in there, and they're ruining these things because they're in there and they do one thing, they punch one wrong guy, or they light this thing on fire, and then the whole movement and their whole message is gone. And Chris Hedges pleads and says, listen, you got to get the public on your side, and you can't do that. So, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and going back to like with I learned a lot about the funding of the military. That was very interesting to me, that section. I mean, I could have spent the whole, every time I turned around, I was like, what? The Pentagon has never been audited.
Nope.
And we put so much money into that because we want to be a strong, and I've always agreed. I was like, oh, I want a strong military. I want to be protected. Well, you're not going to have anything to protect when for one thing,
we're broke.
Our passports are no good right now.
Right.
So we have, though, we don't need Trump's wall. Everyone else put a wall around us. They don't let us in with our poor dealing of the COVID. But
I think they said they lost $1 trillion.
Interesting. Let me see here, where it was talking about upward of half of all federal dollars are spent on the war industry. And
that's private individuals making money. That is private.
So then it goes into that. It goes into that. They're into the private companies that are. Let's see. Where does it say? Yeah, I wrote that in there because I was really surprised. Oh, it says $100 billion a year is spent on intelligence, 70% to private contractors. The Department of Education only gets 68 billion. And then Wall Street and hedge funds are behind the charter school industry. $5.3 trillion goes to fossil fuel, in addition to 492 billion in direct subsidies offered by governments around the world and write-offs and land use loopholes. And it just seems like if someone can write it and we can prove it, why are we not, I mean, I'm definitely, I'm pro-military. Gavin was in the military. I fully support our military brothers in the service. But if
we should be able to have adult conversations about it. You're exactly right. Because
well,
right now,
fund it without. We shouldn't piss everybody else off, and not be able to even take care of our own country.
Right.
When we have people starving, we don't need
take
that
care of
extra $8 trillion submarine or something.
Right. Well, they don't even. There's no oversight. Like we find out all these times that this hammer costs $12,000 or something.
Right.
There's no oversight. That needs to be fixed. But the problem is once you bring that up, and if you try to get a big public movement behind it, they think that you're anti-military, and that's not the case at all. We just want to handle it like we would anything else. Let's be smart about this.
Just like if you audited the schools, you're not anti-school.
Exactly.
And they do that to us all the time.
Right.
What'd you spend this on?
You brought up another point that scared me. That one of the things that this book that really could show the collapse, and I think that's something that as an American, it's hard to wrap your head around. He says by 2030 we're probably done. I don't know what shape that form, with all these things come together, but he says one of the biggest things that's going to happen is the American dollar will not be the main currency of the world. Will not be. Everything won't be based on the dollar. And he says once that happens, man, we are in some big trouble. And he says with our reputation now, with the way things are going to, that could be sooner rather than later. And that's just some aspects I never thought about. I thought we were going to collapse in other ways within ourselves, but really it could come from that. It could come from the way we are handling ourselves economically with things like spending in the Pentagon. Then the American dollar is not the main.
Well, once
currency.
We're all divided, which we've been doing a pretty good job of dividing ourselves across the country. Once we've had that and it starts to break down, then you're not getting that feel good. We all are Americans coming together like you got after 9/11 or something like that. And then it does also, in addition to having our money be down, you have your guards let down, and it just makes it very susceptible for people to, I'm sure someone would love to take us over and say like, aha, because America's always kind of been, this kind of tough, smart ass. Someone's going to come in and, could take us over, and then we could end up in a crumbling society that is full of a lot worse than what we are now.
Yeah, that's the scariest part. I read a book recently called American War. Have you heard of that?
American War?
Yeah, it's a fiction book, but it's really interesting. And Chris Hedges mentions like the situation in it where climate change creates a situation where we have climate refugees from our own coasts that have to move inland. Do you remember when he mentioned that? He said we're going to, and so
that was when he was talking about how all these areas are going to drop off, and then we're not going to take them in. Is that
right?
What you're talking about? How
and
we're not going to take our own people that could be living in our state in.
Well, so there's a guy that wrote a book, and it's a phenomenal book. And actually, I have scheduled on a TBC episode for middle August if the guy's still going to do it. But we read this book, and it's so scary. But everything that Chris wrote about in this book leads to what this guy put in his book. Like, it's fiction, but what could happen because of all these things? And it's like, wow. He just as an American, and the sad thing is it just shows your privilege of living in this country that we grew up in. that we can't imagine living like that. Yet there are people all around the world that live in hell
Right.
every day, where we
Right.
can't
We
say, "Oh my
definitely-
God, that could never happen to us." And it's like, "Oh my God, there are people that live in that and don't known that for generations." Of
Right.
course, it can happen here, and
Yeah.
we're seeing that it might. But Kelly, we have gone over 10 minutes. So
Oh my
I told
gosh.
it's easier than you thought, huh?
It is. And I appreciate that you gave me the opportunity. You know, I knew you had good thoughts, and you know, you turned me on to Peaky Blinders,
Nice. Perfect.
and then this.
Perfect. Well, next time I'm going to have you back. We'll do something lighter. We'll do
Something lighter.
we'll do a novel, right? Sound good?
I mean, I love to learn. It was when it's so deep, it's so and
But heavy.
and powerful. You know, that's the thing,
powerful.
is that it's not just something you can be like, big deal. I don't have cancer. I don't have this. This is
Something's going to
everyone.
affect you in this book, right? So
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kel. I will be in
All right.
touch, and
Okay.
we'll do another one.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.